Boker Tov. Today's daf yomi is Gittin daf Yud Beis. We're going to start on 11b, 6 lines from the bottom. The Gemara is discussing the circumstance where a person, we're discussing it, an agent, a random person can acquire something on somebody's behalf if it's to their advantage. That's called zachin. You can acquire something at somebody's advantage even without their knowledge. But if it's not to the person's advantage, the agent cannot acquire it without their knowledge. What about a case where it's advantageous to one person but not to another person, where if you acquire it for one person, it actually hurts a different person? Like, for example, if Reuven owes $100 to Shimon and Levi, and Yehuda comes along and says, "Well, I'll take this $100 for Shimon, serving Levi," is that going to be okay? So that's what Rav Chisda discusses. So somebody wants to grab money for a creditor, the guy's owed $100, but other people, but this person, this debtor owes money not just to Shimon but also to Levi. And that's actually the dispute between Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanan. As we learned the Mishnah and Peah, Misha Liket as a Peah. So this was the Daf Yomi. Actually, we're still on Daf Yud Aleph, which is Daf Yomi for Shavuos, which talks about the mitzvah of Leket in the book of Ruth. And here is this on the Daf. So it says Misha Liket as a Peah. Somebody he has a field, and you have to give a corner of the field over to the poor. This is the passage in the Torah that comes directly after the holiday of Shavuos. So somebody who has to he has to leave over a corner of the field for the poor. But the owner of the field says, "You know what I'm going to do? I have my poor people who I like. I have my poor guy who I want to support." So he says, "I'm going to collect the field, this corner. I'm a rezu a ploni ani, and I'm going to give it to this poor man who I know." Rabbi Eliezer says, "Yeah, the owner is able to do that. He's able to say, well, I'm acquiring it on behalf of this poor person because I'm going to give it to him." The Chacham say you can't do it. You have to give it to the first poor person you find. So Chacham seem to be saying, like, the position that you cannot acquire something on somebody's behalf if it's to the disadvantage of another person. So therefore, the Chacham say you can't give it to the first poor person because you have to give it to the first poor person because you can't acquire for somebody else if you're hurting a third party. So Amar Meimer V'Tamer Papa, he says, no, maybe it's not the same dispute. Why does Rabbi Eliezer say over there on top of 12a that you can do it only by the case of the corner of the field? Because if he wants to, he can make his properties ownerless, and anybody could be that poor person. Therefore, the owner is allowed to collect it the chazi way. And so therefore, since he could always acquire for himself, he could always therefore acquire it on behalf of his friend. So it's an exception, but in general, you can't acquire it for a third party. And also says Rav Papa or Abaye, in this case, it would not be. And what's the reason why in that case the rabbis say over there you have to give it to the first poor person you find and you can't acquire it? There's a specific verse, and that's how you read the pasuk, even though it says this Gemara is reading it in the opposite way. You're not allowed to collect it for a poor person. In that case, you cannot collect it for him, for a poor person. But in general, you can't be zochet on behalf of a third party. Rabbi Eliezer, what does he do with this verse? What does he do with him? It's to tell us that even a poor person has to leave over. Even a poor person has to leave over a corner of his field. If he owns a field and he's poor, he still has to do the mitzvah of payah.
Is that called Gittin Dibura?
No, it's not a Gittin Dibura. Why would you say it's Gittin Dibura?
I thought that means you're only reading half the post.
No, Gittin Dibura is about testifying. We split the words of the testimony. But a pasuk, the Gemara offers midrash, that the Gemara uses midrash to, like chop up a verse. So the Gemara says, that a person, we had learned in the Mishnah, that if he wants to not support, we said, the Chachamim said in our Mishnah that a man can collect, an agent can collect a get shechor on behalf of a slave, but not on behalf of a wife. And the reason is because it's a merit for the slave, because if the master wants to, he doesn't have to support his slave, but he's obligated to support his wife by the terms of the ketubah. So Shmas Minaf, and the fact that we see that it's his chus to receive the emancipation document on behalf of the slave because he has to support his slave. He doesn't have to support his slave, but he does have to support his wife. We see from here, Yochel Arav, Omar Eved, doesn't this prove that the master could say to the slave, Asay me, work for me, I'm not going to give you any money. You work for me, I'm not going to support you. It might be very, very stupid of the master because in essence, he's going to kill the slave, but he's allowed to. That's what the Gemara wants to say. Shmas Mina, we learn from here that the master can say to the slave, work for me, I'm not going to support you. The Gemara says, no, we're not ready to accept that conclusion. And what's the scenario that we're talking about here is the Amrway, say Masiadecho Mazonosecha. He said, no, here we're talking about a cases. Why doesn't the master have to support him? Because he specifically he told the slave, I'm not going to support you, but you get to keep your salary. If you get to keep your salary, I don't have to support you. And so therefore it's a merit for the slave to go free. Well, the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, if he's saying you work for your salary and you get to keep what you make, well, why would we say it's not a merit for why would we say you can't do that to the woman? Isha Mailo, Isha Damo Atzima Aser de Bimazonasech, the Gavasa Gabe Isha Damo Atzima Aser de Bimazonasech. The same law should be able to apply to a wife. He should say to the wife, I'm not going to support you, you keep your salary. And then in that case, it would be advantageous for the wife to get divorced. Mar says, Isha Mailo, why did we not say that case by the woman? Isha B'lo Safka. We're talking about a woman, she requires $10,000 a month to live, and she's only bringing in $5,000. So therefore, it's not advantageous for her to get divorced. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case that we imagine that's a scenario by the wife, why don't we say that that's the same scenario by the slave, that he's not bringing in his salary, and so therefore the master has to, and so therefore, and still we're saying that's why don't we say that that's the case that we're talking about, where the slave is not bringing in his salary, and so the Gemara says no. The answer is in that case, Eved she'eno avda denahom karse lo shavi lomar omarte l'may mitbai. So if that's the case, he says avda denahom karse lo shavi, a slave who's not even bringing in he's not even worth the amount of food that he eats. L'mare l'may mitbai. What's he bringing in? What's he worth to his master? And so therefore, he's not the master is not required to feed him extra. He's just going to go to the slave is going to go to the store, to the houses, and just beg for money. And so therefore the master is not forced to feed him. And so therefore for this reason, it's a merit for the slave to go free. But a woman, he requires in the ksuba to support her. And so therefore, since he's required in the ksuba to support her, for this reason, it's not a merit for her to go free. So Gemara is still trying to answer this question: is a master allowed to say to a slave, "Work for me, and I'm still not going to support you"? Tashma, the Gemara says, let's try and bring a proof in the following case: Eved shegala arimikva. Let's say a slave is exiled to a city of refuge because he killed somebody accidentally, and now he has to go to the city of refuge. So we say under those circumstances, Ein Rabo Chayav Lazuno, the master is not obligated to support him. Not only is the master not obligated to support him, but the master gets to keep his salary. So don't we see a clear proof from here that the master could say to the slave, work for me and I'm still not going to support you? The Gemara says, no, this is not a proof for that, because what are we talking about here? Why is the master not required to support him here? Here, this case is different. Why? Because he said to the slave, I'm not supporting you because you get to keep your salary. If that's the case, if he's getting his salary, if that's the case, why does the master get to keep why does it say the master gets to keep his salary? If he says he's not required to support him, then why does the master, and he said to him, work for your salary, why does the master get the salary? Gemara says, the master gets the extra, beyond what his mizonos is. Let's say he requires $5,000 for the month to live, and the slave makes 10,000, so the master gets the extra 5,000. Gemara says, well, that's obvious that he gets the extra 5,000. No, Gemara says, no. He might have thought, keeping the kilei slave, but since if the slave doesn't make $5,000, which is what he needs to live, the master wouldn't give him the money. He might have thought, well, if that's the case, then the master doesn't get the extra 5,000. Kamash Moan. So the Gemara is basically concluding that this is a straight law in general, that the master can only say, I don't have to support you if he says to him, you keep your salary. But even if he says that, the master gets the extra money. But the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, what's unique to the Ari Miklat, to the city of refuge? This is an obvious law. If that's the case, why is this a special case of the city of refuge? What's special about it? The Gemara says, you might have thought that in the city of refuge, that he's required to, that he's not allowed to say, work for yourself and I won't support you. Might have thought that the city of refuge is v'chai avid lei. Since it says v'chai, since they say about the city of refuge, you go there and live. Avid lei, you might have thought that he has to support him, and he can't say to him, work for yourself and I'll support you, and I won't support you. Kamash Moan. So we see from here that the master can still say in the city of refuge, work for yourself and I won't support you. Gemara says, well, it can't be that. But from the next part of the brisa, it says, but a woman who runs to the city of refuge, the husband has to support her. So we see from here that we're not talking about a case where he says, work for yourself and I won't support you. Because if he says work for yourself and I won't support you, why is the husband obligated to support her? From the fact that the concluding clause is he didn't say that to her. In the opening clauses, he doesn't say to the slave, work for yourself, and still he's not required to support her. Gemara says, no, really. He said to the wife, work for yourself and keep your money for yourself. But still, why is a husband obligated to support the wife? The woman doesn't make her enough, she doesn't make her salary. And so therefore he has to support her. The Gemara says, but the next clause in the brisa states, the next clause the next clause in the brisa states, but if he says to her, keep your salary in exchange for your support, we see Rashai is allowed to call the Reisha Delo Amaro. We see from here that in the first clause, he didn't say that to her at all. So the Gemara says, Amaro Yahacha Kamar. We call the Reisha Amaro, and the Gemara says, Hacha Kamar. This is what he said. This is what our brisa is saying. Let's say she can make enough money to support herself. And he says to her, and he says to her, go and make your salary. Rishai. He's allowed to do Rishai. He's allowed to say that to her. So well, obviously he could say to her, work for yourself and keep your salary. That's so obvious. Gemara says, no, you might have thought he's not allowed to say that to her. That you might have said that she could say, I want to be modest. I don't want to work. I don't need to go out and work. And I shouldn't be required to work. And so we say, no, you are allowed to say to the wife, you're required to work and I'm not going to support you. You work for your money. So the Gemara says, let's say this dispute about whether or not a master could say to the slave, work for yourself, work for me, and I'm still not going to support you, is a dispute amongst the earlier authorities. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, that a slave can say to his master in the years of the famine, O Parnaseni, O Hotziani Locheres, he could say, the slave could say to the master in the years of the famine, either support me or free me. O parnaseni o itziani ucheres. The Chachamim omer meharashus biyad rabbo. So he says, but the Chachamim say that the master has the right to say, I'm not going to support you and I don't have to release you. Okay, so what are Rabbi Shimon Gamliel and the Chachamim arguing about? Must be Mar Savar Yachol, that one says you could say to the slave, work and I'm not going to give you any food to live. Mar Savar Eina Yachol. And Chacham and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel must be saying he's not able to do that. Gemara says, "V'tizbra, do you really think that that's the scenario of this brisa where he says, work for me and I'm not going to support you? Do you really think that that's the scenario? V'tizbra, hi opar neseni o tziani l'cheros. The brisa says, either give me support or release me. It should say opar neseni, either give me support or tenli ma'aseh yadi, or give me my salary." That if that's what they're arguing about, that should have been the formulation of the brisa. Oteli ma'aseh yadi, oteli ma'aseh yadi b'parnasa asimi ba'alei. So that should have been the formulation. And if you're saying that they're really arguing about whether or not your master is obligated to feed his slave, why does it matter if it's the years of the famine? It should always be required, whether or not it's a famine. So and so here, what's the scenario? Where he says to the slave, you're going to keep your salary and you're going to support yourself. And since it's the years of the famine, the slave is not making enough money to feed himself. Rashbag says that the slave can say, Rashbag says that the slave can then say to the master, either you feed me or free me. Because if I'm a free man, people have more mercy on me and they'll give me more money. Because if I'm not a free man, they'll say it's your master's responsibility to feed you. No, a person who's merciful on a free person would also be merciful on a slave. He's not obligated to free you under those circumstances. So we don't have an answer to this dispute yet. Tashma, Gemara is still trying to give an answer. The Amar Rav, Hamakdashidei Avdo. Let's say a person consecrates the hands of his slave. Also, I have it lova va'ochel. So if somebody consecrates the hands of his slave, and he says that everything that your slave makes is going to go to the temple. Also, I have it that same slave lova va'ochel. He has to borrow money in order to eat. Lova va'ochel. He borrows money in order to eat. Va'osa, the slave does work, and from that extra money, poreya, he pays back his debt. And we see from here that a master is able to consecrate the salary of his slave and not support him. And so we see from here that this answers the question that you could say, you work and I'm not going to support you. So doesn't that answer the question? Says, no, so here we're talking about is where he gives him food. So if he gives him food, he's giving him food. If that's the case that he's giving him food, why does he have to? Why does he have to borrow the food in order to eat? So the Gemara says, we're talking about a case that the master is giving him just a very small amount of food, and the slave wants more. He wants an extra slice of pizza, so therefore he has to borrow the money. The Gemara says, so why doesn't that? The Gemara says, if we're talking about a case that the slave wants more food then the master is giving him, why doesn't the hektish say to him, Ad hashta sagile below hadafa, hashanami sagile below hadafa? The temple should say to the slave, up until now, meaning before you consecrated your hands, you had enough money to eat without this extra food, but now you should get extra. Meaning to say, why do you have to pay back the money you're borrowing? You don't need this extra food. So the Gemara says, Hektish gufei nichalei. This the temple wants him to get more food. Why? Because if he works, if he gets more food, he's going to be a better worker, have more energy. So the Gemara says, well, let's go back to what Rav was saying. How can Rav say that the slave borrows the money on to pay back the salary for his food? How could he borrow money and then pay it back by working? Osa Porea, he works and he pays back the loan. Kama Kadashli, everything he makes is belonging to the temple. How can he ever pay back this debt? He borrows a little bit at a time, he works a little bit at a time, and he pays that back. So each time he makes less than a pruta, less than a penny, so the temple's not getting the money. He's making less than a penny. The temple only seizes the money once it becomes a penny. So he pays back the loan less than a penny at a time. Indeed, that's the logical conclusion. Also have an osa ve'ochal. So Rav says, if somebody says, I'm consecrating my slave's hands to the temple, that slave could work and purchase his food. Dilo avda man polchlei. Because if he's not going to work and he's not going to get his own salary, who's going to feed him? Now, and if you want to say that what we're talking about is b'mala ve'enu yachol, if we say we're talking about a case where the master is giving food to the slave, and so therefore, and if he wouldn't do it, enu yachol, he wouldn't be able to say to the slave, work and I'm not going to feed you. Shapir, that makes sense. But here we're talking about a case where the slave is not working on behalf of his money, on behalf of his support. He's not giving him money and he could still say it to him. If he's not going to work, who's going to support him? So we see from here, that he cannot say this to the slave, work for me and I'm not going to support you. Indeed, that's the conclusion. We learned from Rav that Rav is of the position that the master cannot say to the slave, work for me and I'm not going to support you. So since the Gemara has proved that Rav says, work for me, that you cannot say, the master cannot say, work for me and I'm not going to support you, the Gemara brings that actually Rabbi Yochanan argues with Rav. Rabbi Yochanan, the Amorai, argues with Rav. So let's say Gemara is going to prove that Rabbi Yochanan argues with Rav from the following source. Tashma. Usually Tashma introduces a brisa, but here we're going to say it's not. It's introducing an Amor. Rabbi Yochanan, hakoteya. So again, Rav says a master cannot say to the slave, work for me and I'm not going to pay you. But Rabbi Yochanan says, hakoteya yad abdu shachaveru. Let's say somebody chops off his friend's, the hand of his friend's slave. No sin shifto ufuaso rabo. So there are 5 things you get if you damage somebody else. You have to pay nezek, tsar, ripoy, sheves, boshes. Damages, pain, medicine expenses. Sheves is lost wages, and boshes is humiliation. So let's say somebody chops off the hand of a slave. He has to give the sheves, the lost wages, the refuaso, and the medical expenses l'rabo to the master. Also, I have a nizom and and that slave, how's he going to get supported? He has to collect charity. So don't we see from here, don't we see from here that the master can say to the slave, work for me and I'm not going to support you. I'm getting your lost wages and you go collect, and I'm getting your medical expenses and you go collect the money from charity. So the Gemara says, no, here we're talking about cases where he's giving him the money. He's supporting him. Well, why does he have to go collect from charity? He goes collect the extra money from charity. He wants an extra slice of pizza. Why does it say he gets supported from charity? It should say he gets extra money from charity. No, we see from here that he can say to the slave, I'm going to take your money and I'm not going to feed you. And this is a dispute between Rabbi Yochanan who's arguing with Rav. Shmamina. So we see from here Rabbi Yochanan and Rav are arguing with each other. Amar. So let's analyze this statement. No sin shifto refuaso rabo, that the master gets the slaves lost wages and medical expenses. Shifto pshita. Okay, fine. It makes sense that the master gets the lost wages That makes sense because the slave was contracted to work for him. He has to do $1 million worth of work, and now you hurt the slave, so it cost me $1 million. But refuah, so it's what medical expenses is the master getting from the slave? You have to pay the medical bills. You have to give the money to the doctor. The money is not going to the master. The money is going to the doctor. What do you mean the master is getting the medical expenses? So the Gemara says, "Refuasa tidehi debai itasuye be." The Gemara says, why does the master get them? So the Gemara is saying, I don't understand. The refuasa tidehi, doesn't the medical expenses go to the slave? The ba'itzuyi, he needs to pay the doctor's bill. He needs to pay the hospital to treat him. Where it says, no, it's no, we're talking about a case where they said, we're going to give you money for 5 days of painkillers. And but the slave says to the doctor, cut it off the first day. Give me like this very intense medicine on day 1. And he got healed in 3 days instead of 5 days. Now he has 2 extra days of the oxy pill, so he could go onto the street and sell them for the street market value. I mean, God forbid you would do that, but you're talking about a case where he makes 2 days off on medical expenses because of his own toughness. You might have said, sorry, well, since the slave went through the pain and it's his pain, he gets the extra money. You might have thought he gets the extra money. Kamashwano, it goes back to the master. So there's no point in the slave going through the extra pain because it's going to go to the master. So the Gemara says, let's go back to the dispute between Meir and Chacham in the Mishnah, whether or not it's a merit to free a slave. The Chacham say it's a merit for the slave to be freed, whereas Meir says it's not. Tanya Rebbe Lezer, Amarnu Meir. Rebbe Lezer says, we said to our friend Meir, they call him Meir, we call him Rebbe Meir. Isn't it a great merit for the slave to go free? Amar Lanu, Rebbe Meir said back to us, Chovu, no, it's a very big demerit. Shemaya Evet Kohen, because if the slave was a Kohen, poslam and truma. Now he can no longer eat truma, and so therefore, Meir says the slave doesn't want to be free because he can't eat truma. Here it says so he said, yeah, but he doesn't have to support him. So it's a big merit for the slave to go free. Amar Runner may respond, yeah, but he could run away. If he runs away from the master, he's not free, but he can still eat the truma. So but now that he's been freed, he can't eat it. He could have always just run away and he could still eat it. Gemara says, Avo Isha Chofua. So that's why we said, okay, we agree with Rabbi Meir that even though it's a merit for us, we say it's a merit for a slave. He says it's not, but we do agree that by a woman, it's a big demerit to get divorced. She came because she can no longer eat the truma and she loses her support. So Mike Amar on their way. What were they saying? What were they saying to him? And what was Rameir responding? This is what they said to Rameir. It's fine. They said, okay, I understand that since he's not obligated to support him, I understand why it's a merit for the slave to be released. But how are you going to respond to the fact that he doesn't have to, that the slave can't eat the truma anymore? And if you want to say, if you want to, the master could always throw him the get, the emancipation, and then he can't eat the truma. The slave could have run away, and then he could still eat the truma. And if he had ran away, he can eat the truma, and this one can't eat it. So Gemara says, therefore, that's what Rabbi Meir is saying. And so he's saying this one, he can't eat the truma anymore. So therefore, it's a demerit for him to be released. So the Gemara says, Shaper Kal Amaru. Rabbi Meir responded good. So the Gemara explains, and Amar Rabba Hainu de Kahadru to Kamahadru Masnisim Ibneshu Kenyano. So this is, and we'll have to see how, maybe just to see here. So this is what it says in our Mishnah. This is what it says in our Mishnah, that this is how they respond because he is the acquisition of the master. Meaning, say, it's not going to be considered the release is not going to be considered like a demerit on behalf of the slave, because the bayi shakel arba zuzim Yisrael because if he really wanted to, if the master wanted to disqualify from eating truma, even though he ran away and he's not able to free him, he could take 4 zuzim from a regular Jew, and now the slave is owned by a regular Jew, and so therefore he can't eat the truma, and so therefore it's the Chachamim say he's not really getting any benefit by saying, well, I'm not in your presence, so I can eat the truma, and so therefore it's a great demerit for him to be released. Well, Rabbi Meir, what would Rabbi Meir say? He said, Tenach Evet Kohen, and according to Rabbi Meir, will say, the Gemara asks the question of Rabbi Meir, according to Rabbi Meir, who says that it's a demerit to be released because he can't eat the truma. Fine, if the slave of a Kohen can't eat the truma, I can understand why it's a demerit for him to be released. But Eved Yisrael, Michael, but the slave of a regular Jew can't eat the Kohen, can't eat the truma anyway. Of course, it should be a merit. Amar Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yitzchak, oh no, because the slave, the Eved Kanani, is allowed to be with a woman who's not Jewish. He's allowed to have relations. He can get married to a Shifcha Kananis. And now that he's released, he can't marry this girl he has his eye on, the Shifcha Kananis. And so therefore, that's a big demerit for him to be released. The Gemara says, just the opposite. It's a great merit for him because now he can marry a Jew. The Gemara says, no, the slave prefers to marry the non-Jew because zilale ushlichalei upritzalei, because this Cananis, she's more available to him and she's more lewd, and so he prefers to be with this Canaanite woman than with the Jewish woman. This is their not the most ecumenical Gemara on many levels, but this is today's Daf Yomi. We'll stop here. Shkoyach.